I want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us tonight. I see a few familiar names on the list there, people who would attend some of our talks in the museum. So thank you for coming along. Look forward to seeing you all again sometime soon in the museum. My name's Marion Kelso and I work in Larne Museum, and that's part of the Mid and East Antrim Museum and Heritage Service, which also includes Mid Antrim Museum and Carrickfergus Museum. Tonight is the last night in a series of webinars on exploring your roots, and these received funding from the Museum Development Network, the Art Fund and the Northern Ireland Museums Council. The webinars began on Tuesday evening with the presentation by Natalie Bodles of Roots Revealed, which looked at late 18th century emigration from the Ballymena area to North America. Last night's talk by Dr William Roulston from the Ulster Historical Foundation explored the churchyards and cemeteries in Carrickfergus. Just to let you know, the webinars are being recorded and we hope to present them online at a later date. We'll put that on our social media pages and email to let everybody know when that happens. Tonight's webinar will explore Larne's history as a port town in the 18th century, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome our speaker, Dr William Roulston, Research Director with the Ulster Historical Foundation, who's joining us once again. William will be happy to answer some questions at the end of the presentation. Please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You'll see that the chat function has been disabled. Just type your question in any time during the session, and I'll hopefully be able to put some of your questions to William at the end. I will now hand over to Dr William Roulston. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Marion, for your words of welcome. And I'd like to thank the Museum Service for inviting me to speak on this occasion about Larne as a port town in the 18th century. What I'm going to be doing in this talk will be to try to interweave the story of Larne as a transatlantic port in the 1700s with the families who were involved in trade and commerce and in the emigration trade, and to show how we can find out more about these families through a range of different sources, in particular to explore their memorials in the churchyard of St Sedmus. And then I'm going to be highlighting a number of items in the collection of Larne Museum and showing how these can be useful in researching ancestors. Now, I certainly don't come here tonight as the expert of all there is to know about Larne in the 18th century. I'd refer you to a number of books. For example, Felix MacKillop's excellent book on Larne and East Antrim is really a superb study of Larne from the earliest times to the present day. If you want to read more broadly on the story of 18th century immigration to America, then I would heartily recommend R.J. Dixon's Ulster Emigration to Colonial America, first published in 1966, but has basically been kept in print ever since then, and there's still considerable demand. It's still regarded as the classic work of scholarship on the subject. Now, as we get into the talk, what I'm going to do is switch off my camera and we'll begin properly. Now, one of the reasons that Larne became so important as a port in the transatlantic immigration story in the 18th century was, of course, the fact that it had a very good harbour. And that was recognised going way back into the 17th century and even earlier, that Larne had an excellent harbour. This is a map from the wonderful Down survey maps of the 1650s. They're produced in the mid-17th century as part of the Cromwellian confiscations in Ireland, called the Down survey maps because the information was mapped down onto paper. And this shows an excerpt from a map showing Larne, and you can see Old Fleet, as it's called there, harbour, belonging to Inver Ale or alias Larne. And the little script at the top refers to the harbour being a very safe harbour, being 6 fathoms below water, and so on. So Larne was recognised as having an excellent harbour, and that was one of the contributory factors in its development as an important port in the 18th century. If I move on to another map of well, Larne and part of the coastline of East County Antrim. This is from the famous Taylor and Skinner's Maps of the Roads of Ireland, surveyed in 1777. And this book is available now on the Internet Archive. So through archive.org, you can view this wonderful book that maps out the roads of Ireland and names many of the gentry houses, and also sketches out the outline of the towns. Now, in 1752, Richard Pocock, who was an English clergyman, visited Ireland and conducted a tour, and he left us a very detailed account of his visit. And this is an excerpt from it relating to Larne. He writes, "I ascended a little height, at the top of which is a new and most beautiful scene. At the top of which a new and most beautiful scene appeared of the delightful harbour of Larne. Larne is pleasantly situated at the north end of this bay, a point of land running out to the southeast, directly south of which is the harbour for large vessels, where they are well defended against the weather." So at this stage, Larne was certainly really developing into a transatlantic port. Larne town itself was also continuing to develop. This is a map of Larne from Proney from 1735, and you can see the outline of the town. You can see the tenements are sketched in and outlined and numbered. And Reverend William Henry, a Church of Ireland clergyman based in County Fermanagh, who was involved in a movement to try and capture as much topographical information of Ireland around about 1740. In his account of County Antrim, he described Larne as a thriving little town. And John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, on his visit to Larne in 1758, described it as a small seaport. Now, little and small, I think in the context of Ulster, certainly Larne was more than a little or small seaport. It was certainly developing into one of the more important of the coastal towns around the north of Ireland. Now, much of Larne's trade was initially, across the Atlantic, or rather across the Irish Sea in the North Channel. But we can find out a lot about the inhabitants of Larne through the Antrim estate papers that are held in the Public Record Office in Belfast. So the Antrim estate was a vast estate created at the beginning of the 17th century, granted to Randall MacDonald, who was created first Earl of Antrim in 1620. And this estate began at Larne and stretched all the way to Rathlin Island. It covered about a third of the entire county of Antrim. And Proney has an absolutely superb collection of papers relating to the management of this estate. And the records are extremely well organized and sorted into different categories. So the leases have been sorted, first of all, by barony and then by location. And I'm just showing you the first set of records relating to Larne. The way it's been categorized, it also includes Mullard, Garden Moor, and Town Park. So within this set of records, there are nearly 500 leases relating to Larne. And work through this, and you can already begin to see that there was actually quite a diversified citizenry, you could say, of Larne. There was a broad range of occupation types resident in the town or found in the town. So it really was a developing town, a proper town with a developing urban economy. And that again was largely, or to a large extent at least, due to its regional location on the coast of County Antrim and its trade across the North Channel with Scotland and across the Irish Sea with England. And I mentioned about that trade already. And so here's just an example of where Larne has appeared in a letter. This was a letter from Robert Ward of Lisboy to Mr. Justice Ward. These were the wards of Castle Ward in County Down. And Robert Ward writes, on the 22nd of January 1745, a ship was cast away near Newcastle on Sunday morning, and all the crew drowned except 4. She was loading with oatmeal and came from Liverpool bound for Larne, and ship and cargo belonged to Mr. H. Montgomery of Larne. Well, that was Hugh Montgomery, and the Montgomery family will certainly be cropping up later in this presentation. So certainly there was Larne was linked in economically to Scotland and to England. There would also have been a coastal trade going down towards Dublin and further south, and then round the north coast to the port of Derry also. However, Larne was also, by this stage, a transatlantic port. Now, arguably the most famous ship to leave Larne in the 18th century was the Friends Goodwill, which sailed from Larne in 1717 with 52 passengers on board. Now, you can find out more about the Friends Goodwill through the web link you can see on the screen. I know that Dr. David Hume has been very much involved in telling the story of the Friends Goodwill. And in 2017, the local council held an event to mark the tercentenary of the voyage of the Friends Goodwill. Now, it was a really quite horrendous voyage. In fact, it lasted 5 months, and the ship eventually reached Boston in September of that year. It encountered various difficulties on the way. Now, the voyages tended not to last as long as that. Voyages maybe would have been 7 to 10 weeks in length, but a 5-month voyage must have been absolutely horrendous. Now, the voyage of the Friends Goodwill is really at the start of the great surge of migration from Ulster to America, the first of the great surges of migration. Certainly, people from Ulster had been going to America from the late 17th century, but we see a real outflow beginning in the late 1710s. Now, on Tuesday night, Natalie Bodle looked at the background to emigration in the 18th century. So I'm not going to say very much about that, but certainly what you can find is that there were a range of factors. There was a religious factor affecting Presbyterians and their estrangement from the state in the 18th century because of the various restrictions on their rights and freedoms. There were also economic factors. And when you look at the real peaks in the emigration story in the course of the 18th century, you'll see that when you might say economic crises were at their most severe, that is when you see real peaks in emigration. So the late 1710s was a difficult period here in Ulster for a variety of reasons, through famine and drought and harvest crises, death of livestock. We see another real crisis in the late 1720s, which sparks another surge of migration. In the 1740s, there was another number of years of real difficulty, and so on. So where we see the peaks of emigration coincide with real situations of distress here in Ulster. Now, where you can see for yourself a memorial to the emigrants from Larne is in Curran Park. This wonderful sculpture, unveiled in 1992, captures, you could say, the emigrant spirit. And 1717 is such an important year in Larne's immigration story, and that story continues and intensifies through the course of the 18th century. Let me show you a slide which really highlights Larne's importance as an immigration port. So in the third quarter of the 18th century, these figures, incidentally, are from R.J. Dixon's book, Ulster Immigration to Colonial America. So Dixon analyzes newspapers and has extracted a vast amount of information about sailings from Ulster to America between 1750 and 1775. So in the third quarter of the 18th century, 13% of ships, nearly 60 vessels, sailing to America from Ulster ports, as advertised in the press, left from Larne. So to put that into a broader context, 32% of the ships sailed from Belfast, 29% sailed from Derry, 19% from Newry, and 7% from Coleraine. So Larne ranked 4th overall in terms of ports in Ulster sending out ships to America. And interestingly, just 7 ships account for 44 of those sailings. Now, on the slide, you'll see various individuals who played an important role in the emigration trade, various residents of Larne who played an important role. So James McVicker, for example, agent for 17 sailings, 12 for the ship James and Mary. The Montgomerys, Hugh and John, 11 sailings each in that period. Robert Wilson, John Wilson, James Agnew, and Samuel Montgomery. And you can see the ships named as well, and the more prominent ships named also. So let's move to where we can see some of the memorials to the individuals involved in Larne's transatlantic story. Where we're going to go to St. Sedma's Church in Larne. Now, St. Sedma's is an ancient ecclesiastical site. It has a very long history, going back to the early Christian period when it was a monastery here. There was a Franciscan settlement at Edinburgh in the later medieval period. And following the Reformation, as was typical in many parts of Ireland, St. Sedma's was taken over and became a Protestant parish church. So it became a parish church for Inver, and continued in use and continues in use right up to the present day. It is one of the oldest churches still in regular use today in Northern Ireland. The churchyard around St. Sedma's continue to be the main burial place for the people of Larne, and that continued to be the case up until the opening of McGarrell Cemetery in the town in 1867. And so St. Sedma's was the place of burial for the entire parish. Like other parish churches across Ireland, it was the place where the entire community gathered to bury their dead, regardless of religious backgrounds. People of all denominational backgrounds can be found in the old parish churchyards in Ireland. I'd highlight a couple of resources that you may find very helpful in finding out more about the church and churchyard. Well, first of all, the inscriptions in it have been published. They are in the Ulster Historical Foundation's County Antrim Gravestone Inscription Series, Volume 4 in that series. The inscriptions were recorded by George Rutherford, and the book was edited by Professor Richard Clark. And also, there's a very attractively produced and presented DVD on St. Sedma's Church, presented by Patricia Beattie, and that is available through the church. So if you want to find out more about St. Sedma's, about the people who are buried there, about the story of the church and its furnishings and the history of the site, then I'd certainly encourage you to check out the book and the DVD on your screen. You can also find a great deal about the people of Larne through the surviving church records. And to highlight some of the records that survive from the 18th and early 19th centuries, well, first of all, for Inver and Larne at St. Sedma's, this is from the Prony Guide to Church Records. You'll note there are baptisms from 1806, marriages from 1817, and burials from 1826. However, there are also vestry minutes going back to 1763. And the vestry was the body that dealt with the, you might say, parish business. So the allotment of money, the parish cess or parish tax, which was used to keep the church in repair, to pay the parish schoolmaster, to pay the gravedigger, the sexton, to look after the aged and infirm. The parish also had a role in maintaining roads that ran through the parish. So you can find out a great deal of information about the inhabitants of Larne through the vestry minutes, which go back to 1763. And that, again, I would emphasize that applies to people of all denominational backgrounds, certainly not exclusively members of the Church of Ireland. And for the non-subscribing Presbyterian Church of Larne and Kilwater, there are baptisms going back as early as 1720, marriages from 1721. So, an absolute wealth of information about the members of that congregation going back to the early 18th century. You'll notice there are also poor accounts going back to 1720. So these records are available in the Public Record Office. They're available on microfilm there. If you want to find out more in general about the survival and availability of church records for the province of Ulster, then check out the Prony Guide to Church Records. If you simply Google Prony Guide to Church Records, you'll be taken to the Prony website where you can find it. It's downloadable as a PDF. It runs to over 350 pages, and it goes into great detail about what's available, the covering dates, and the actual references to the items in Prony. Now, going back to the church, there are a number of late 17th century headstones, and this is one of the oldest. It's not the oldest, but it's certainly one of the oldest, and it's to Hugh Porter. It's placed against the north boundary wall. Records that Porter died in 1694 and refers to him as a merchant of Larne. And you'll find on headstones and tombstones, not simply in Larne, but elsewhere, occupations, positions in life, family connections, and genealogists are well aware of the importance of gravestone inscriptions as being vital building blocks in creating a family tree. So to find a stone going back as far as 1694 is absolutely fabulous if that relates to your own family. And many people do have a certain, but there is a real poignancy for many people of being able to go and stand at the site of the family burial place, even if there is no headstone there, but to be able to go to churchyard where they know that their ancestors have been buried for generations. People want to do that. People want to make that connection. Now in St. Edmund's Churchyard, there's a wonderful array of richly decorated headstones. In the graveyards along the Antrim coast, you see some wonderfully sculpted memorials with some fantastic coats of arms and sometimes sculpted figures. On the left-hand side of the slide, you'll now see a stone to the Smiley family, and it was erected by James Smiley and his wife Margaret Caldwell in memory of their three daughters, Margaret and two Marys. So obviously one Mary who died, and then another Mary who also sadly died. The date on it is 1761. And if you look at the top of the headstone, you can see three carved figures of females. You'll see them at the top of the stone, presumably representing the three daughters of this couple. Then on the right-hand side of the slide, you see the top part of a headstone that commemorates Janet Har, who was the wife of Robert Allen of Ballycraigie, who died in 1754, aged 75. And again, we see this carving of a female head and upper body shown on that stone. So a walk through this graveyard is in many ways like walking through an open-air museum where you can see art and sculpture from a bygone age. And you can see and gain an insight into, you might say, the mental worlds, the material culture of our forebears. Here's another fabulous stone in the same church to John Tom, who died in 1767, aged 35. And then there is a poem praising his many virtues. Now, it may be that John Tom was a schoolmaster. He doesn't seem to have been a clergyman, but if you look at the top of the stone, you'll see a carving of a figure standing at a desk, holding an open book in one hand. There are books piled up on the desk. You can see other books in the very top part of the stone. So perhaps John Tom was a schoolmaster. and he is shown teaching his pupils. Perhaps that is what is being communicated there. It's a really excellent example of a tombstone which shows carvings representing the deceased as in life. I mentioned coats of arms, and you can find a coat of arms carved on this stone. Now, this is interesting. This is a tombstone to one of the great merchant families of Larne in the 18th century. The Montgomery family were involved in such depth in terms of Larne as a port town in the 18th century. And there were various different. There was Hugh Montgomery, if you have mentioned already in the context of the ship from Liverpool sinking in 1745. There was John Montgomery, who's named on this stone. There was also a William Montgomery and a Robert Montgomery and a Samuel Montgomery. I'm not entirely sure how they all connect together. Maybe that Hugh and John were brothers. Hugh died in 1772, age 64. He's commemorated on another stone here. But this is the one to the family of John Montgomery. Now, although I'll just go back, you might say you can see the coat of arms and so on carved at the top of this stone. Well, over 100 years ago, F.J. Bigger, who was a noted antiquarian, and Herbert Hughes went around the graveyards of East County Antrim, and they recorded inscriptions, and they also made recordings or rubbings of the carvings on the tombstones. And these were published in the Ulster Journal of Archaeology. Again, that's a source that's available through archive.org. I'm just showing you the inscription and the decoration at the top of the Montgomery stone. So the inscription begins, "Here lieth the body of Jane Doggett, wife to John Montgomery, merchant in Larne, who died October 28th, 1752, aged 43 years, and 4 of their children." And it records also then the death of John Montgomery himself, aged 72 years in 1782. And appropriately enough, there's a carving of a ship in full sail at the top of the tombstone. So that's worth checking out, the Ulster Journal of Archaeology, because in some cases, the inscriptions are maybe not legible now. It's not just for Larne. He covered quite a few graveyards along the coast of County Antrim, and there's a wealth of information contained in those old Ulster Journals of Archaeology, and they're available now for free online through the Internet Archive. Another hugely important source for studying 18th century families is the Belfast Newsletter. Began publication in 1737. The first surviving issue is from 1738. And a wonderful index to all surviving issues up to 1800 has been created and is available through the University of Louisiana website. You'll see the web link at the top of the slide. It includes over 300,000 different words that have been extracted from the surviving issues of the newsletter and have been brought together in a database. And through this, you can find out so much about the ships leaving Larne, about the merchants involved in the trade. This is the sort of thing that was used by Dixon in compiling those lists of sailings from Ulster ports between 1750 and 1775. So it's an excellent resource for anyone studying a family in the 18th century. Let me just show you a couple of cuttings from it. You can now get access, the index is available for free on the University of Louisiana website. You can get access to the newsletter itself through the likes of the Lennon Hall Library. There are copies in Prony, there'll be copies through our public library system. There are digitized scans of the newsletter available on the Ancestry website also. So here's a ship, the top image for New York in America, the ship William and George of Larne, Robert McCammon, commander, now in Larne Loch, a prime sailor, well manned and victualled, about 200 tons berthing. We've cleared to sail for New York on the first day of September next, and so on. So anyone interested in sailing in that ship should apply to George Dunlap, merchant in Ballycastle, or Hugh Montgomery, merchant in Larne. And then below it, another ship sailing to New York, the ship Pitt, in this case 250 tons, commanded by John Montgomery of Larne. And anyone interested should apply to Mr. Thomas Gregg of Merchant. He was a major merchant in Belfast at that time, or Mr. Montgomery of Larne. That's from 1761. And these are sort of advertisements you will find repeated in virtually every issue of the surviving newsletter from the 18th century. Just to bring up another one for a ship sailing to Charleston, and it's from the newsletter from 1786. And this is very interesting because what it reveals is that large catchment area, or potential catchment area, really extended across a wide area in the northern part of Ireland. So here's a ship called the Irish Volunteer, 350 tons, captained by Archibald McNeill, ready to sail on the 5th of August. And those wishing to take passage in that ship could apply to, you can see, Joseph Corrie in Londonderry, Messrs. Alexander and Thomas Begley in Coleraine, Andrew Newton in Coke in County Tyrone, or the owners of the ship John Montgomery and Co. in Larne. So it's interesting that the newsletter advertisement is indicating that people interested in, say, as far away as Derry, or even Derry's hinterland, which could include Donegal, could potentially be sailing on this ship from Larne. So certainly while most people who sailed from Larne came from the surrounding area, much of Mid Antrim and South Antrim, that people from further afield may also be prepared to travel to Larne to sail on this ship. And there's a little MB on it as well. A vessel will be sent to Belfast before the sailing of the ship for the convenience of such passengers as may incline to have their luggage brought round from that by water. Again, potentially, if you're from Belfast or the greater Belfast area, you could also have sailed from Larne, and there would even be a vessel, a smaller boat, to bring your luggage to Larne to save you from having to lug it across country. Now, of course, with the expansion of Larne as a port town, there were also new opportunities for ancillary industries. And one of those was established by a man named Glasgow, a rope maker had been in Belfast, and here, according to this news item from the newsletter of 1760, he set up a rope walk in Larne, and he advertises what you can acquire from that. But it's clear that Larne's importance as a seaport is certainly contributing to other industries developing in the town. And you can see the Glasgow stone in St. Sedma's down below. Again, a slate stone. The inscription is very clear, very crisp. It's over 250 years old, but still so easily read. And we can see again the richness of the decoration shown on it. Another family involved in shipping and commerce in Larne in the 18th century was the Shutter family, and you'll find the name, certainly the name Robert Shutter, or sometimes Robert Shutters or Shooters maybe, being named very often as the captain of a ship sailing to America. Well, here's a stone to two of the children of James Shutters. And then what's very interesting is that after his name, James Shutters, in square brackets, there's Mariner. Now, we use square brackets today, of course, but it's interesting to see the use of square brackets back then also. So the children of James Shutter or Shooter, Hugh, who died in 1738, and Elizabeth, who died in 1757. And finally, as far as tombstones in Larne are concerned, I had mentioned the MacNeil family, and they are a family of long-standing importance in Larne. And by the latter part of the 18th century, Malcolm MacNeil of the Corran was involved in a broad range of different activities. He was involved, for example, with John Montgomery in leasing the Murlough Bay and Glenarm collieries from the Earl of Antrim. They did so in 1784. They were involved in salt works in Larne. MacNeil was involved in a shipping agency. And in 1790, John Montgomery, that's another member of the Montgomery family, later John Montgomery, and Malcolm MacNeil bought a ship called the Tartar for transatlantic voyages. The ship had been built in Liverpool in 1772 at 190 tons. It was the largest ship sold to Ireland from Liverpool in this period. So Malcolm MacNeil was a serious businessman with interests in many different things in Larne in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. And we can see the tombstones to the family here in St. Sedma's Churchyard. And one of the bottom of the photograph, it reads, the burying place of Malcolm MacNeil, Esquire, the Corran. Now, some other sources you may find useful if you're looking for more information, not simply on Larne and its emigration story, but more broadly, the emigration story from this part of the world to wherever it might be, North America, Australia, New Zealand, wherever it might be. Well, that's the Irish Emigration Database. This was created by the Mellon Centre for Migration Studies based at the Ulster American Folk Park. And the Irish Emigration Database is a huge collection of various items relating to emigration. So you may have, for example, items of correspondence, maybe official reports, and a vast number of newspaper extracts. So if you look down the left-hand side of the image, you'll see where for Larne, I just put in Larne as a word, and there are 540 items in the database relating to Larne. So most of those, with a greater number, newspapers, shipping advertisements, 234, or newspaper shipping news, 135. So this is a free-to-use resource. It's well worth checking out. There's a lot of information about families and individuals in this. Now, I've mentioned Prony already, and its wonderful collections of documents. It's great collection of estate papers for the Earl of Antrim's estate, the church records, and so on. Well, here's a very interesting item in Prony's collection. It's the Journal of John Moore, and it chronicles his voyage from Larne in 1760. So the original copy of this is in Prony. And on the screen, you can see the first page from his journal, and he writes, on the 15th of May, my sister and I proceed from Carrickfergus, our native place, to Larne, in order to embark from thence to New York in North America. The ship was the Cape Breton, and the captain was Robert Wilson. 35 passengers on board, besides my sister and me. So not a very large number of passengers, it must be said. There were other ships where there were maybe 400 passengers on board. In this case, there are fewer than 50. Now, on the Prony website, through the Prony catalogue, you can actually read this journal in full. So it goes into detail about the voyage, but then goes into detail about John Moore's experiences in America. So a very interesting document. And then you might say a first-hand account of somebody sailing from Larne to America. Now, I mentioned you might say the peaks in the emigration story. The immigration outflow was not constant and regular. Rather, there are peaks and troughs in that immigration flow. And one of the big peaks, in fact, the biggest peak of all, was in the early 1770s, when thousands upon thousands of people were sailing from Ulster to America. And one of the most significant episodes in that migration story was the exodus led by the Reverend William Martin in 1772. William Martin was a Covenanter minister. He was the first Reformed Presbyterian minister to be ordained in Ireland at the Vow, near Ballymoney, in 1757. And the memorial at the Vow records his ordination and mentions on it he was minister until October 1772, when he emigrated with 460 families for the New World in the Americas, landed in South Carolina in December 1772. At the bottom is his well, not the meeting house when he was there, but it's Kelswater Reformed Presbyterian Church, which stands on the site of Martin's meeting house. So it's a very important story. Next year will be the 250th anniversary of that story, and it relates directly to Larne because Martin and the others with him, there were several ships, they sailed from Larne to South Carolina. And I'll just bring up this item from the newsletter from December 1772. And unfortunately, people will ask this question regularly, will I find my ancestor in a passenger list from this period? Unfortunately, the answer to that is no, because there are no official records of people leaving Ireland from the 18th century. Okay, no, unfortunately, there are no records of people stepping on a ship to sail to America. However, what you can sometimes find is an item placed in a newspaper in which the passengers or a selection of the passengers on board the ship express their gratitude to the captain and his crew for their good conduct towards them. And this is one such letter for a ship that sailed from Larne in 1772. And we see the names of passengers, a selection of the passengers, thanking the captain of this ship for his good conduct. It's dated from Charleston. And so if you go through the newsletter, you will come across letters like this. Now, they're not, of course, a full substitute for you might say, the absence of formal passenger lists, but they can at least help to fill in some of the gaps if your ancestor happened to be on one of the ships and was one of the people who signed one of these testimonials. So that's another reason for checking out the newsletter to see what you can find through it. So moving on then to a selection of artifacts from Larne Museum. So these are items held by the Museum in Larne, which can help you in your research. And I'm going to look at a number of these now. So here's a very interesting item. I mentioned the Smiley family already in the context of the headstone. Well, the Smileys were a very important family in the history of Larne. And on the screen, you can see a couple of images from a Bible, a Smiley Bible that was donated to the museum in 2009. And in this Bible, there are 4 locks of hair, which are believed to belong to the surviving children of Sir Hugh and Lady Elizabeth Smiley. And like many family Bibles, you will find details about the birth, or marriages and deaths of members of the family. Family Bibles are a very important resource, as we know. Well, here, this is the Smiley Bible, and you know, one of the important items held by Larne Museum. Another one. This is a commemorative book presented to Sir Hugh Smiley by the first Larne congregation when Sir Hugh was created Baronet Smiley of Dromalis in Larne and Gallow Hill in Paisley in 1903. And it's signed by the members of the first Larne Presbyterian congregation. It's a beautifully illuminated book. A lot of care and attention was lavished on making this an exquisite work of art. And you can see the signatures on it. You can see the members of the committee. There would also be the members of session was signed separately, and then the members of the congregation putting their name to this to this illuminated volume presented to Sir Hugh Smiley. A book by the Reverend Classon Porter within the museum's collection. Classon Porter was a non-subscribing Presbyterian minister. He was a very avid local historian. He published books and articles. He lived for a time in Ballygally Castle. And here we have a publication of a lecture he gave in Larne in 1872. The book was printed in 1905. So that's another one of the items in the collection. Classon Porter, was a very fine historian who gathered a vast amount of information about not simply the Larne area, but even further afield. He was very interested in Presbyterian history more broadly. Now, I mentioned McGarrell Cemetery being opened in 1867. Well, this is a map of McGarrell Cemetery from 1902. So it was opened in land bequeathed by Charles McGarrell, who was a prominent citizen of Larne in the 19th century. The graveyard was opened in 1867, but the first burial did not take place until March 1868. But even this was quickly ran out of burial space. It was opened to alleviate the pressure on burial space with burial ground in the churchyard of St. Sedma's running out. This was opened in 1867, but already by the beginning of the 20th century, it was becoming too small. And so a new cemetery was opened in 1905 for Larne. And here we have another item, fabulous item in the museum's collection, a map of the Roman Catholic division of the new cemetery of Larne, also known as Greenland or Craigie Hill Cemetery. So this is a map showing the burial plots in the Roman Catholic section of the graveyard, the new graveyard. There's sometimes, you might say, items that are not generally considered obvious when it comes to family history research, may in fact contain information that is absolutely wonderful if it concerns your family. Well, this is one such item. This is a calendar produced by the First Presbyterian Church in Larne for 1935. And if you go through this calendar, you'll find names and verses or statements from the members of the congregation. So each date seems to have been sponsored by a different person. It gives their name and address, along with, as I said, some sort of quotation, maybe a verse or a statement or something like that. So this in itself is a wonderful record of the members of the first Larne congregation from the mid 1930s. And the front of the calendar has its dedication, dedicated to the Reverend John Lyon Donaghy in the 50th year of his ministry by the women of the congregation. So something like that is priceless, really, when it comes to the looking at this congregation and the families of this congregation at that time. And finally, another item you may not necessarily think as being an important artifact. At the time, it wouldn't have been regarded as an important artifact, but looking back now, over 40 years later, this is very, very important. This is a vinyl record for First Larne Presbyterian Church concerning well, first of all, it gives a brief history of the congregation on the back of the vinyl record, the cover of the vinyl record, and a special praise service recorded in July 1977 before the congregation moved into a new suite of buildings in 1978. So again, I'm not sure how many of these vinyl records survive out there, but there is one in the collection of Larne Museum, and a very important item it is. So that, I hope, has given you an insight into Larne as a port town, a transatlantic port town in the 18th century. In many ways, I only touched on the subject. There's so much more that can be found out, but it's wonderful to be able to see how documentation with the, you might say, the headstones and other sources can really help to build up a picture of Larne's importance as a port, a transatlantic port in the 18th century. And also to show you some of the items in the collection of Larne Museum that have a bearing on family history, things that you maybe wouldn't have immediately thought related to family history, but are clearly so important and have such significance in terms of our heritage. So I'm going to thank you very much for listening, but I'm going to hand back to Marion, who will have a question or two, I'm sure, for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, William. That was a really interesting presentation, looking at Larne's history from so long ago, and a lot of useful resources there for local family history research. So thank you very, very much. That was fantastic. We do have a couple of questions, but just before we get to those, I would just like everyone to know that there will be a short poll on your screen just after our question and answer session, and we'd appreciate it if you could fill in your answers to that short poll just to give us some feedback on the webinar. So before we get to that, there are only a couple of questions at the minute, William, but the first one is there anything known about the emigration ships of the early 1700s, and were they much more humane than the coffin ships a century later? And that is from a lady called Kathy.
Well, I don't know much about, the actual ships themselves in terms of their construction. I would direct to people interested in that to, studies of ships and sailing vessels from that particular period. Certainly, the conditions aboard ship were very uncomfortable. There may be the impression that once you were out to sea, you could wander around the deck and you could spend the time looking out at the waves, but really, most of the time, the passengers were kept below in very cramped conditions, conditions where they maybe couldn't even stand up fully, and allowed up for a short time on deck each day, if the weather conditions permitted it. So the voyage itself was something of an endurance test. For the fortunate passengers, the voyage was maybe over in as quickly as 6 weeks. But as we heard in the case of the Friends Goodwill, it lasted 5 months and must have been absolutely awful for those on board. So I can't, I simply don't know enough about the ships themselves in the early 18th century, but I would direct you to any publications that actually deal with that subject.
Thank you very much, William. I will just, another question here from Mary, and she asks, what is the significance of the word snow in front of the ship's names?
Yeah, it's just the name of a type of ship. Again, not being an expert on ships or even knowing very much about ships themselves, I can't give you that definition, but it's simply a type of sailing ship in the 18th century.
Okay, thank you very much. Marty asks about a slide that you have regarding, it says artwork done by a member of the committee. It listed the members of the church as well as the committee, and could you show that slide again?
Yeah, that must be the one for
the illuminated book.
Yep. That must.
I
think that must be it. That's the illuminated volume presented to Sir Hugh Smiley by the First Larne congregation. So we see, yes, the names, and if the individual has the opportunity, obviously it's not really possible at the moment with restrictions, but they could have I'm sure they could have a look through that, or access could be arranged to let them see the full names in that book, because it would go, the list of names would cover several pages within the volume.
Thank you very much for that. We have a question from Louise, who says, where would Larne residents be buried prior to the McGarrel Cemetery opening in the 1860s?
Well, the great majority of them would be buried in the churchyard around St. Sedma's. That was the principal place of burial up until the opening of Megarrel. So St. Sedma's churchyard would be the place to look. And for the great majority of people of Larne, and I mentioned already the fact that the inscriptions in it have been published and compiled by George Rutherford and edited by Professor Richard Clark.
Thank you very much. Lady called Faye here says, very interesting presentation. I've attended all 3 of your webinars. Thank you for making these sessions available to those of us living across the pond in Canada. Not sure I know how to pronounce the name Miramichi, New Brunswick. I visited Ulster twice on my trips to Ireland, and these sessions brought back a lot of pleasant memories. So thank you very much for that, William. Mm-hmm. Mary asks, where is the Church of Reverend William Martin?
Right, the Kells Water Reformed Presbyterian Church is near the village of Kells. It's on the Grove Road near the village of Kells. It's a very small minor road. If you heard Shank Bridge, it's not too far from there, and it's in a very picturesque location, as we said, by the Kells Water, the River Kells Water, and in 1760, a renovated an old mill building was renovated as the first meeting house for the Covenanters, and that's where Martin preached for over 10 years. The building was rebuilt in 1806, and not too long ago, the Clerk of Session actually brought me a copy of the building contract for that church from 1806. So I deposited that in the Public Record Office, where researchers can now get access to it.
Okay, thank you. Brendan says reference has been made a few times to Megarrel Hall and Graveyard, and who was this person?
Well, again, Megarrel was a prominent resident of Larne in the 19th century. To find out more about him, I don't really know very much about him, but I'd refer you to Felix MacKillop's book on Larne. There'd also be a bit about him in the published inscriptions, the published gravestone inscriptions for Larne as well. No doubt he turns up in newspapers quite a bit as well. So he was a prominent resident of Larne in the 19th century.
Thanks for that, Brendan. You can also contact Larne Museum on our email address there, and I can send you some more information about the Megarrels when I would have a bit more time just to gather it all together. Thanks for that question. Lolly Spence says, that was thoroughly enjoyable. Thanks, William and Marion. Are there any plans to digitise the 1935 calendar or the Reverend Klassen publication? Would be lovely to see these online. She suggests it might be a project for me for next year. Lolly, quite a good idea. I'm not sure about the Reverend Klassen publication, but I'd certainly be interested in progressing with the calendar. I think a lot of people would find it very interesting. So you never know. Thanks for suggesting it. We have Margaret, who asks which cemetery were the Smileys buried in. I'm not sure if you would know the answer to that, William.
Well, the earlier Smileys were buried in St. Sedma's. I'm not sure where Sir Hugh was buried, I must say, but the earlier generations of the family were buried in St. Sedma's.
Sir Hugh is in Greenland Cemetery, and there's a wee bit of information around that as well, Margaret. Also, if you wanted to email me, I can give you more information on that directly. Thank you very much. Timothy says, when and where can I see the other recorded presentations? I live in Texas, my internet was down all week. Timothy, we're not entirely sure when we will be presenting these recorded sessions. We are hoping that they will be shown on Mid and East Antrim Borough Council's YouTube page, but we have no arrangements made for that at the minute. But if you keep an eye on our social media pages, both Mid and East Antrim Borough Council and Larne Museum's Facebook page, and perhaps you might be on our email list, we will let everybody know when those videos go live. So thank you very much. Timothy also says, is there any place where I can get all of the different resource websites that were mentioned in this presentation? I should have had my camera out to capture them, but didn't think of it until too late. Perhaps William can assist us there with some of your resource information. Did you have a page? with some resource information on it there that perhaps we could go back to?
Yeah, well, I'll flick back through some of the websites I mentioned. I'll just go back to the start here. Okay, so well, first of all, the Down survey maps. And again, as you say, Marion, this will be made available through the Council's YouTube page. So anybody could go through this and pause and copy down these details. But the Down survey maps on a website or hosted by Trinity College Dublin. The most useful of the websites will be the Crony website. Again, just rather than copying down the web link on the screen, just Google Crony catalog, and that will take you to the Crony online catalog. And one of the great strengths of Crony is the detail with which its collections have been catalogued and listed. And so you can see from that slide alone, the fact that there are nearly 500 items listed under the heading of leases for Larne. Going right back, you can see the first one from 1624. I'd also mentioned, well, again, the Friends Goodwill story. Again, just Google Friends Goodwill 1717, and you should be able to find this page. Another important resource I'll mention is the Belfast Newsletter Index. So that, again, just Google Belfast Newsletter Index, and it'll take you to this page, and you can carry out a search through it. I also mentioned the DIPAM website, the Irish Immigration Database, available through it. Let's see, got the transcriptions of many records relating to immigration, including over 500 relating to Larne alone. So those will be available. All of those are free resources as well, actually. So you get access to them. I know I put up the web links, but it might even just be quicker to just Google those things. So Crony catalog, the DIPAM website, Irish Immigration Database, and the Belfast Newsletter Index. And if you put those, say Belfast Newsletter Index, it'll be the first thing that pops up when you do a Google search.
Thanks for that, William. I've just had Gordon mention that the upcoming HAME series and BBC may well provide further information on the Reverend William Martin. The Ballymoney episode is to be broadcast on the 7th of March in 2021. Because we actually had another question there. Let me just see if I can find it. Oh yes, Sue asked, are there any plans to celebrate the 250th anniversary of Reverend Martin's voyages? If so, where might they occur? I'm not aware of any commemorations that are planned. I don't know if you would be, William.
Well, I'm working with a number of people looking at different ways in which the event could be marked. In 2018, we had the tercentenary of the migration to New England, led by, among others, the Reverend James McGregor of Achadui and the Reverend James Woodside of Dunbow. A number of events were held there on both sides of the Atlantic, conferences and exhibitions and workshops and so on. So we're hoping that some events can certainly be held. Of course, we're in the realm of the unknown at the moment, but hopefully, certainly by next year, we should be able to start, events, proper events, bringing people together can be organized. And since we've now become fairly adept at using such things as Zoom, I hope we can make use of the technology available to us, maybe to have an online conference that links people in America or wherever they may be with people back here. So there certainly some thoughts are being given to commemorating that important migration episode.
That would be very interesting. Robin asks, from your research, can you indicate your views on the benefactor of Larne and slave owner Charles McGarrell? Wikipedia tells us it was an Ireland-born Ulster Scots merchant and slave owner. In 1833, the British government abolished slavery and compensated owners such as McGarrel, who became a major beneficiary of this scheme. With his wealth, he conducted business in the City of London, funded civic works in his hometown of Larne, County Antrim, and bought land and property in Ireland. Bit of a heavier question, I think.
Yeah, well, I've said already, I just don't know enough about the McGarrel family to say too much about them, but I refer you to, well, you've already mentioned, Marion, the fact that you have information in the museum, so maybe that information would be of help to the questioner.
Well, that would also answer Donna's question, who asked for more information on the McGarrels too. So Donna, if you could send a wee email to the email you see on your screen, marion.kelso@midandeastantrim.gov.uk. I can send you some information from our archives. Just a few more here, William. Margaret is interested in learning more about James Smiley and his wife, Margaret Caldwell. What would you suggest? Is it possible to get a copy of the slide of their headstone? I'm looking for the Caldwell family in Antrim. And just before we move on, that will answer Marty's question, who asks, is there a town named Antrim? Because on records he's finding it says Antrim, Ireland. So yes, there is a town called Antrim. So Margaret's question is finding out more about James Smiley and Margaret Caldwell. And is it possible to get a copy of that slide of their headstone?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm very happy for you, Marion, to just
pass that along.
Take the photograph of the slide and pass it along.
No problem.
In terms of how to find out more, well, we've got the inscription. It names 3 of their daughters. I would suggest having a look at the Proney catalogue and specifically the Antrim estate papers to see if Smiley can be found in that. I've also shown the slide of the church records for Larne and the fact that the non-subscribing congregation in Larne, the Presbytery of Antrim congregation as it would have been, has records going back to 1720, and those are available on microfilm in Proney. So I would definitely encourage the questioner to have a look at those. Of course, they may not necessarily belong to that congregation. There were two Presbyterian congregations in Larne from the early 18th century. One has got records surviving from the early 18th century. The other, I'm afraid, doesn't. So there's a challenge, of course. But certainly have a look at the available church records to see what's there, the Antrim estate papers, and any other sources that you can get hold of through Proney.
Thank you, William. Una says, not a question, just to say very interesting presentation and thank you. And our last question here at the moment, well, actually it's not a question, it's another comment. It's Gordon. Very enjoyable and thoroughly enlightening presentation. And particularly, you've reawakened my desire to further research my ancestors' transatlantic exploits through the newsletter resources identified. Many thanks. So thank you very much, William. Thank you to everyone who have put through questions there. We are going to launch our poll shortly there, and if you would please provide us with some of your feedback, we would appreciate it. It won't take very long at all. Thank you very much. Just had another message there from Robin saying many thanks for arranging this very enjoyable presentation. Thanks very much, Robin. I'm glad you enjoyed it. We'll see you at live talk soon, I'm sure. So I think everyone has now participated in our poll there. So we will be ending the poll. That's the end of that. Let me just, yes, that is everybody. So the poll is now complete. Once again, I want to thank you all for joining us and for your questions tonight. And if you do have any more questions, please email the museum. The screen is still there with our email address on it. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, William.
Thank you. Thank you very much.